They slid a crumpled envelope across a table worth more than my first car, and the room full of people in designer suits burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh, not an uncomfortable one. A real, open-throated laugh, like they'd been waiting years for this exact moment. I sat there holding it, this small, beaten-up envelope with my name written in the handwriting I had loved for 31 years, and I remember thinking, this can't be real. But it was real. Every single second of it was real. And what I didn't know yet was that the laughter would be the best thing that ever happened to me. My name is Raymond. I'm 66 years old, and I live in a small house in Decatur, just outside Atlanta, with a garden I tend every morning before the Georgia heat gets serious. I have good coffee, good neighbors, and more peace than I ever thought a man my age could find. But 3 years ago, I sat in a high-rise law office on Peachtree Street with nothing but a plane ticket in my shaking hand and every person I had called family for 3 decades laughing at my pain. If you have ever loved someone completely, if you have ever built your entire life around a person in a family, then you need to hear this story. Because what happened to me is a story about what real love actually looks like when it's stripped of every comfortable pretense. My wife, Celeste, died on a Wednesday morning in October. She was 61 years old. Ovarian cancer, the kind that announces itself too late and moves too fast. I was with her at the end, the way I had been with her through everything, sitting beside her bed in that too bright hospital room, holding her hand while the machines went quiet. She had looked at me the night before with those clear, steady eyes of hers and said something I didn't fully understand at the time. She said, "Raymond, I need you to trust me." I told her I did. I meant it completely. I had no idea what I was actually agreeing to. Celeste had 2 sons from her first marriage. Dominic was 40, broad-shouldered, and certain of himself, in the way that men who have never faced real failure tend to be. His wife, Yvette, wore her opinions on her face like jewelry, expensive and deliberately visible. Andre was 37, quieter than his brother but somehow colder, the kind of man who smiles while he calculates. I had known these 2 men for 31 years. I had attended their graduations, their weddings, their children's birthday parties. I had never once, in all those years, felt like they considered me anything more than a long-term inconvenience who happened to share their mother's last name. I told myself it didn't matter. I had Celeste. That was enough. The will reading was scheduled for 11 days after her funeral, in the offices of an attorney named Patricia Salcedo. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Atlanta, and the October light came through flat and pale. I remember being grateful for the light. It was the only thing in that room that felt neutral. I sat down across from Dominic and Andre, with Yvette beside Dominic like a second set of eyes, and I folded my hands on the table to keep them still. I had barely slept in 11 days. I was wearing a suit I'd last worn to a fundraising gala Celeste and I had attended together 2 years before. I remember thinking she would have straightened my tie. Patricia began reading. Her voice was professionally even, the kind of voice trained to deliver life-altering information without a tremor. To Dominic, Celeste left the condominium in Buckhead, the one with the wraparound terrace and the art. Celeste had spent 15 years collecting, along with its furnishings, its contents, its carefully chosen life. Dominic nodded like he was receiving a quarterly report. Yvette allowed herself a small, satisfied exhale. I watched them and thought about all the evenings Celeste and I had sat on that terrace, watching the Atlanta skyline go amber at sunset, talking about the future we were going to build when she got better. To Andre, Patricia continued, Celeste left Hartwell Strategic Group, her consulting firm, built over 22 years from a single client and a rented desk in a shared office along with all assets, holdings, and subsidiaries valued at approximately $19 million. Andre actually leaned back and smiled at the ceiling. $19 million. He said it quietly, to no one in particular, like he was trying on the number to see how it fit. I felt the blood leave my face. I had sat beside Celeste in that office during her most difficult years. I had reviewed contracts with her late at night, talked her through every major decision, held her hand through every setback. I was not listed as a co-owner. I was her husband. And apparently that distinction mattered enormously to the people in this room. Patricia kept reading. The lake house in North Georgia to Dominic. The investment portfolio divided between both sons. The jewelry to Yvette and Andre's wife. Each item felt like a stone being placed on my chest. Then Patricia stopped. The room went quiet in a particular way, the way silence does when everyone knows what's coming next. And to Raymond, she said, her voice slightly different now, slightly gentler, she slid a crumpled envelope across the table toward me, This envelope, as specified. I stared at it. It was the kind of envelope you buy in a bulk pack at a drugstore, small, slightly worn at the corners. My name was on the front in Celeste's handwriting, the looped, unhurried cursive she used when she wasn't rushing. I picked it up and I felt how light it was. Almost nothing inside. After 31 years, whatever remained of my place in her world weighed almost nothing. Dominic laughed first. He didn't cover his mouth. He didn't look embarrassed. He just laughed, open and certain, the way men laugh when they believe absolutely that they have won. Andre joined him, shaking his head slowly like this was even better than he'd hoped. Yvette looked at me with an expression I can only describe as triumphant pity. "We knew," that expression said. "We always knew what you really were." I want to stop here for a moment and be honest with you about what it feels like to be in that situation. Because I've tried to describe it to people and the words always come out too small. It's not just humiliation, though it is that. It's not just grief, though it is that too. It's the specific terror of realizing that the story you believed about your own life, about who you were to someone, about what you meant might have been something you told yourself alone. If you have ever sat in a room where the people around you laughed at your pain, you know that nothing else in the world feels quite like it. It hollows you out from the inside. I opened the envelope. My hands were shaking badly enough that it took me 2 tries. Inside was a single airline ticket. One way, Atlanta to Zurich, departing the following morning at 7:15. I read it twice, then a third time. Zurich, Switzerland. A country I had never visited. A city where I knew no one and did not speak the language. A one-way ticket with no explanation, no note, no second document tucked behind it. "Go ahead," Andre said, grinning. "Read it out loud. We're family." I told them it was a flight to Switzerland. The laughter that followed was the loudest yet. Dominic slapped the table. He actually said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, he said, "She finally sent you home, old man." Yvette said something to Dominic in a low voice, and then, louder, said that at least Celeste had the decency to give me a head start. Patricia Salcido gathered her papers with the careful focus of someone trying very hard not to be present in the room where they actually were. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to. My body just decided it was time. I picked up the envelope and the ticket and I walked to the door. And behind me, I heard Dominic say to Andre, not to me, but loudly enough that I was meant to hear, 30 years of showing up to a party you were never actually invited to. The door closed behind me. Their laughter followed me into the hallway, down the elevator, out into the flat October light on Peachtree Street. I stood on the sidewalk and I did not know what to do with my hands. I spent that night in a hotel 3 miles from the house Celeste and I had shared, which I had just learned from documents slipped to me alongside the will had been left to Dominic. Our house, the house where we had planted a dogwood tree in the backyard the spring after our wedding. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the plane ticket in my lap and $1,100 in my checking account, and I thought about every moment in 31 years when I should have asked harder questions. Then I thought about what Celeste had said the night before she died. Trust me, Raymond, I had said I did. I still didn't know what that meant. The flight to Zurich took 9 hours. I have never been a comfortable flyer, and Celeste always held my hand during takeoff. She had done it since our first trip together, a weekend in Savannah, laughing at me for gripping the armrest so hard. I gripped the armrest alone and watched the eastern seaboard fall away beneath me, and tried to believe that the woman who had loved me for 3 decades had not, in the end, sent me away as a joke. I tried. Some hours I succeeded, most hours I didn't. Zurich arrived as pale morning light over green mountains. I went through customs. A board official stamped my passport. I walked into the arrivals hall carrying my single bag in no particular destination, and then I saw him, a man in his late 50s, dark suit, holding a sign that read, Raymond Whitfield in neat capitals. My heart did something complicated. I walked toward him as though I was walking toward the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. He introduced himself as Ernst. He said he had been expecting me. He said, and his voice was careful, deliberate, like someone delivering a message they have rehearsed, that Mrs. Celeste Whitfield had made all the arrangements. He said she had asked him to tell me, when we arrived in Geneva, 3 specific words. He would not say them yet. He picked up my bag before I could object and led me to a black car parked outside the terminal, and I sat in the back seat watching Switzerland roll past the windows, clean and improbable and beautiful, and I thought, she planned this. While she was dying, while she was losing weight and losing strength, and holding my hand in that hospital and telling me to trust her, she had been planning this. I didn't know yet what this was, but it was not nothing. Honestly, if I'm being real with you, if I'm telling you the truth about what I was feeling in that car, I was angry. I want to be honest about that, because this story is easy to make into something purely beautiful in hindsight. And I don't think that's fair to you. I was furious. I had been humiliated in front of people who had never respected me, sent out of the country like an afterthought, and now I was in a foreign car being told to wait for an explanation. I pressed my hand against the window glass and looked at the mountains, and I thought, Celeste, I don't know if I can forgive you yet. That's the truth. Ernst drove me to Geneva. We stopped once at a small cafe, and he bought me coffee and a sandwich without asking, and he said that Celeste had told him I would forget to eat. He said it simply, without sentiment, but it stopped me cold. She had thought about that. While she was arranging legal trusts and coordinating with attorneys across an ocean, she had thought about whether I would remember to eat on the drive. I didn't say anything. I just ate the sandwich. The attorney's office was in a building on a quiet street 2 blocks from Lake Geneva. The man inside was named Gerhard Wust, small, white-haired, 70s, with the particular stillness of someone who has delivered important news so many times it no longer surprises him. He rose when I entered, shook my hand, and said that Celeste had spoken of me with great affection. Then he sat down, opened a folder, and told me that Celeste had first come to see him 23 years ago, 3 years into our marriage. And I thought I knew everything about my wife. What she had built in Switzerland quietly, methodically, without ever once mentioning it to me, was a series of trusts and investment accounts that she had funded gradually over 2 decades, shielding them completely from her American estate. What had begun as $2 million in initial transfers had been allowed to compound, managed by Gerhard's firm, almost never touched. As of that morning, the total value was $47 million. Every cent of it held in an irrevocable trust with a single beneficiary. Me. I made him repeat the number. He did. $47 million. I sat with that number the way you sit with something that doesn't fit in any drawer you own. I could not make it real. He explained the structure, the legal framework, the reasons it was entirely outside the reach of Celeste's American will, and then he told me the second thing, the thing that turned the story from extraordinary to something I still haven't found the right word for. 6 months before she died, Celeste had hired investigators in Atlanta. She had become suspicious, she would not tell me why, not in so many words, though I later understood she had noticed small signs, and what the investigators found was this. Dominic and Andre had been meeting with an attorney who specialized in conservatorship cases. They had been meeting with a physician who had treated Celeste. They had, together, drafted a legal strategy designed to have me declared mentally incompetent in the weeks following Celeste's death, while I would still be numb with grief and easy to confuse. The plan was a conservatorship with Dominic as my legal guardian. There was a facility already identified. There were witnesses already lined up to testify about my erratic behavior during Celeste's illness. The facility would be expensive. My finances would be managed on my behalf. For my own good, I have sat with that information for 3 years now, and I still feel it the same way I felt it in that Geneva office, like the floor has quietly disappeared beneath you and you are falling through something cold. These were men I had watched grow up, men I had cheered for at their graduations, celebrated with at their weddings, men whose children called me Uncle Raymond, and they had looked at me at a 63-year-old man watching his wife die and seen an obstacle. Not a human being, an obstacle. Gerhard handed me an envelope, Celeste's handwriting on the front. He told me she had written it specifically to be given after I heard the full picture, and he left the room to give me privacy. I opened it. She wrote in the unhurried cursive I had loved for 30 years, and I am going to tell you what she said because I believe she was writing it not just for me. She wrote, Raymond, I know you are angry with me. I know this feels like I abandoned you in the most public and humiliating way possible, and I am asking you to believe that every decision I made was the opposite of abandonment. Dominic and Andre are my sons. I love them. I created them. And I created them badly, and I will carry that truth into whatever comes next. But I could not let them do to you what they planned to do. I could not let them take a man who gave me 31 years of honest, faithful love and reduce him to a ward of their convenience. The only way to stop them was to give them exactly what they wanted and to make sure you were safe and free before they discovered that what they wanted would not be what they expected. The company is real. The debts are also real. I did not lie to them. I simply told them the part of the truth that confirmed everything they already believed about themselves. The rest of the truth is yours. Live freely, Raymond. That is the only thing I ever wanted for you. All my love, always, Celeste. I sat in that office and I wept in a way I had not permitted myself to weep since she died. Not polite, controlled grief. Real grief, the kind that comes from somewhere below language, from the part of you that existed before you knew how to keep yourself dignified. Gerhard came back in after a while and handed me a glass of water and waited with the patience of a man who had seen people receive life-altering news many times. When I could speak again, I asked him what I was supposed to do now. He said, "Whatever you choose, Mr. Whitfield. For perhaps the first time in a very long time, that is genuinely true." I want to stop here and say something to you, because I think this is the part of the story that matters most, and it's also the part that's easiest to miss. What Celeste did was not just financially brilliant. It was an act of love so complete and so costly that I am still not sure I deserve it. She allowed herself to look cruel. She allowed herself to be seen as a woman who dismissed her devoted husband with a cheap plane ticket while leaving millions to the sons who had always prioritized themselves. She died knowing that the last image some people had of her was a woman who had finally come to her senses about the man she married. She died knowing I might be angry with her. She did all of that so I could be free. If you have ever loved someone enough to let them think badly of you for their own protection, if you have ever made a sacrifice that required you to look like the villain, then you understand something about Celeste Whitfield that most people will never understand about love. They came to Geneva 6 weeks later. I was having coffee at a cafe near the lake when Ernst called to tell me that 2 American men matching Dominic and Andre's description had arrived at the Beau Rivage Hotel the night before and had already contacted 3 Swiss law firms. I told him to take me to Gerhard's office. I wanted to be sitting behind that desk when they walked in. Gerhard's receptionist showed them in 20 minutes after I arrived. They looked different from the men who had laughed in that Atlanta conference room. Dominic's suit was expensive but slept in. Andre had the pale, tight-eyed look of a man who had not been sleeping. Yvette was not with them. They sat down across from me, and I watched them register, slowly, that the power in the room had shifted in a way they had not planned for. Dominic tried his commanding voice first. It didn't fit the room. He told me there were complications with the estate. He told me there were debts they hadn't known about. He said something, and I noticed he used the word "we" very deliberately about how we're in serious trouble and we need to figure this out together, as though 6 weeks ago we had been partners. As though the word family had not been used to describe the people laughing me out of a conference room. I let him finish. Then I looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then I looked at Andre. I want you to understand something about that silence. It was the first silence in 31 years that belonged entirely to me. Gerhard explained the Swiss holdings. He explained the trust. He explained the $47 million and exactly who its beneficiary was. He explained that Celeste's American estate, generous as it appeared, carried liabilities that would consume the vast majority of its stated value within 18 months. He explained this with the gentle precision of a man delivering a diagnosis, and I watched Dominic and Andre go through every stage of that information in real time. Disbelief, recalculation, something that looked briefly like grief. Then, because they were who they were, anger. Dominic said I had to have known. Andre said something about contesting the Swiss arrangements. I told them, quietly, that Celeste had spent 23 years building those arrangements specifically so they could not be contested. I told them I knew about the conservatorship. I watched the color leave both their faces at the same time. I told them that their mother had known too. I told them she had made her decisions with full knowledge of theirs. Andre said after a long moment, "She set us up." I thought about that for a beat. Then I said, "She gave you exactly what you asked for. She just made sure it came with everything that goes along with it." They left Geneva that evening. I sat alone in Gerhard's office for a long time after they were gone, looking out at the lake in the late light, feeling something I did not immediately recognize. It took me a while to understand what it was. It was the feeling of being done, not triumphant, not vindicated exactly, just done with a chapter, free to begin whatever came next. What I'm about to tell you is the part people find hardest to believe. 6 weeks after they left Geneva, I instructed Gerhard to make an anonymous payment that retired every debt attached to Hartwell Strategic Group, the condo, and every other liability Dominic and Andre had inherited. All of it, gone. It cost me approximately $17 million. I made the decision in about 45 minutes. I want to be honest about why. It was not because I forgave them immediately. It was because Celeste had loved them and Celeste had loved me, and I could not hold both those things simultaneously and then let her sons lose everything. She hadn't built an empire to have it collapse. She had built it to teach them what it required. I wanted them to have the chance to learn that lesson on solid ground, not from rubble. That's all. Andre called me 2 months later, his voice different in a way that took me a moment to place. He sounded uncertain. He sounded like a man who had recently discovered that certainty was not the same thing as being right. He told me an anonymous benefactor had cleared their debts. He said he didn't know how to process it. He said, and I heard something real in his voice when he said it, that he and Dominic had spent the past several months actually running the company, actually understanding what their mother had carried for 20 years, and that it had changed something in them. He said, I don't know how she did it. I said, she did it because she loved you, even when you made it hard. Dominic called 3 weeks after that. He was getting remarried a woman named Priya, a middle school art teacher, someone he had met while doing court-ordered community service for a financial dispute I will not detail here. He asked if I would come to the wedding. He asked, quietly, if I would walk beside him. He said he knew he had no right to ask. He said I was the only person who had loved his mother the way she deserved to be loved, and that if he was starting a new life, he wanted to begin it with me in the room. I said yes, without conditions. The wedding was small, held in Priya's family's backyard in Marietta on a Saturday in early June, with bistro lights strung between oak trees and children running through the grass. Andre gave a toast. He looked at me directly when he spoke. He said, I spent 30 years watching a man show up for our family without ever once being asked. I spent 30 years being too proud and too afraid to call that what it was. He paused. It was love. Just love. And I want to apologize, publicly and without reservation, for how long it took me to see it. There was a moment of quiet in that backyard, the kind of quiet that means something. I cried. I am not embarrassed to tell you that. Here is what this story taught me. And I don't say it lightly because I lived it at a cost I wouldn't wish on anyone. The deepest love is often indistinguishable from its opposite. At first, protection can look like abandonment. Sacrifice can look like cruelty. The people who love us most are sometimes the ones we misread the longest. And the question worth sitting with, really sitting with, not just reading past, is this. Who in your life has been quietly protecting you in a way you haven't recognized yet? Because Celeste did it for 31 years before I understood any of it. I don't want you to wait that long. I live quietly now. The house in Decatur, the garden, the coffee. Dominic and Priya have a daughter named Celeste. They asked if that was all right with me, and I told them it was more than all right. Andre calls on Sunday mornings, usually while I'm in the garden, and we talk about nothing in particular. The company is healthy. They run it well now, with the kind of respect for what it costs to build that only comes from having nearly lost it. And sometimes in the evenings, when the garden is done and the light goes golden low the way it does in Atlanta in October, I sit on my back steps and I talk to Celeste. I tell her the boys are good. I tell her the company is good. I tell her that Dominic named his daughter after her and that Andre laughs more now than he ever did when she was alive. I tell her that her plan worked every single piece of it and that she was the most brilliant and the most loving person I have ever known. And I tell her that I understand now what she meant when she said to trust her. I tell her I'm sorry it took me so long to trust her completely. The plane ticket to Zurich was not a dismissal. It was a door. And behind it was everything she had spent 23 years building for me in the dark. The finances, yes, but more than that, the freedom, the proof, the undeniable, irrevocable evidence that I had mattered, that I had been seen, that I had been loved all the way to the bottom of the word. That is the only inheritance that stays. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Type 1 if you think I was right to pay off their debts anonymously. Type 2 if you think they should have faced the full consequences. Or type 3 if you're still deciding. I genuinely want to know what you would have done in my place. And tell me what city you're watching from. I read every single comment, and I want to know how far this story has traveled. If you've ever been in a room where someone laughed at you when you were already breaking, or if you've ever loved someone so much you made yourself look small to protect them, I want you to know, I see you. Leave a comment and tell me your story. You are not invisible here. If this story reached something in you, please subscribe. There are more stories like this one, stories about love and loss and the wild, unlikely ways people find their way back to each other. I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.